This week on Connecticut Power and Politics, extended emergency. Governor Lamont wants a 7th extension of Connecticut's COVID emergency. But this time, he's handing over power to state lawmakers.
We're not asking for the governor to be able to issue orders by having this emergency in place.
Will it mean an end to masks in school?
I think it's a little early to make any predictions.
Plus, war games. Russia inches closer to invading Ukraine.
There should be no doubt about our seriousness of purpose when it comes to diplomacy.
Are we headed to World War III? Should we be worried?
I think the probability at this point of a Russian invasion probably better than 60-70% at this point.
Also, cyber danger. A new report says hacks are becoming more frequent and more aggressive. So have any of these attempts been successful? Connecticut's chief information officer tells us how our state is fighting back.
We are very cognizant of protecting citizen data. That is our #1 security goal.
And rolling the dice. Online gambling is big business in Connecticut, but what's the human cost?
Behind every one of those millions of dollars is a person.
I'm John Craven. This is Connecticut Power and Politics. Hi everyone, as always, a lot to cover this week, so let's get to it. Making news, power shift. Governor Lamont wants to hand off COVID decisions to state lawmakers. Up till now, the governor has called the shots through executive orders. What are those orders? The statewide school mask mandate. A lot of parents want this one to go, but Governor Lamont wants lawmakers to keep it, at least for now.
Divide your answer by 3.14.
In Mr. Taylor's math class, numbers mean everything, and the number of COVID cases is why kids are still masking up.
Hey, everybody.
During a visit here, Governor Lamont said the mandate should stay, even though New York plans to drop it soon.
I think it's a little early to make any predictions. We were just at a 25% infection rate 2 weeks ago.
State lawmakers will have the final say. Lamont is asking them to pass 11 emergency orders into law. In addition to mask rules, the governor wants to keep a booster requirement for nursing home workers. The governor also wants lawmakers to extend the state of emergency.
If we're going to vote on these, I think they need to have a public hearing.
The top Republican in the state Senate wants school masking left to local school boards.
We've always been in favor of local government. The government closest to the people is the best government.
I would be open to it if the metrics said we can do that safely, and I think we're getting close to that. We're not there yet.
Here in Bridgeport, no matter what happens, masks will probably stay through the end of the school year.
I know there are parents across the state that would be extremely angry at hearing that, but you have to also factor into the considerations of the people that are working in the schools and the other kids.
All right, let's bring in Paul Mounds. You know him. He is Governor Lamont's chief of staff. So, Paul, school masks are one of the things, they're right here, one of the things that you guys want to extend, at least for a little while, right?
Yes, while we're seeing our infections rate and our hospitalizations still go down, it's still at a level that the governor felt that it was still important to keep in place.
Well, Connecticut is certainly not an island, so let's take a look at what some of our neighbors are doing. Rhode Island and Massachusetts still require school masks, but yes, Massachusetts mandate ends next month. So does New York's, and Governor Kathy Hochul has said she plans to let it expire. New Jersey's governor's hinted that he might let the mask mandate in schools end sometime this spring before the end of the school year. So I've heard this a lot this week. Why not shift control to the local districts and let those school boards decide?
No, I think it's an honest question. We've been keeping up with what our neighboring states are doing, but also keeping focus on what is really going on in our state. We have heard from all sides as it deals with this various issue, especially from our school personnel, those within the classroom, parents, teachers, and students as well.
So what if lawmakers come back and say, we don't want this to be statewide? Some towns are doing better than others, and we want them to decide. Would you guys be okay with that?
If the legislature, if that's the prerogative of the legislature in terms of the response to to coronavirus response here in the state, we will accept that, honestly.
Governor Lamont also wants to extend Connecticut's COVID emergency for a 7th time. Now, under this emergency, the governor has enjoyed sweeping powers to issue executive orders, everything from the mask rules we've talked about to ordering nursing home workers to get booster shots. You are now asking state lawmakers to pass 11 of those orders into law temporarily. All right, so Paul, I want to ask you about this because there is a lot of confusion about exactly how this would work. You're saying under this extension, the governor would not be able to issue new executive orders, right?
That is absolutely correct. Obviously, right now, let's just start back. The governor is functioning under these emergency orders based upon the law that has been passed by the legislature, particularly this legislature, when they passed a special act last year, creating the framework that the governor is working under. And just to remind your viewers, the framework is if the governor put forth an executive order, the legislature, particularly the legislative leaders, have 36 hours to reject it. And basically that order will go in place. That's Democrat and Republican. How many of those orders have been rejected? 0. And now but past that, the state is still in an emergency. Why is that? By putting forth and saying we're in an emergency, we as a state can then go to the federal government and say we have a designated body or within the state that designates that we are still currently in an emergency that will still allow the state to tap into important federal funding, whether it's dealing with important housing funding, important health funding.
So to put this in layman's terms, essentially the legislature is declaring an emergency, and because of that, they get to set the rules of the road.
Yes, like they've always had.
Let's talk about the end game. This week, I asked Governor Lamont how much longer we need a state emergency.
The end date for me is not calendar related. The end date to me is infection related. I thought we were really near the end of this thing back in November. And then, like Mike said, all of a sudden some good Omicron came and it came up, like a tornado.
Look, it seems like COVID is going to be with us long term, maybe forever. We can't just stay in a state of emergency forever, can we?
You're right, John. No, we can't. At one point, we were at over 300 executive orders in place to be able to manage the overall state's response and keep the state going. We are at 11 right now. So I think the first thing that we're all going to have to do is take a look in the mirror and see how we're going to adjust our lives based upon the presence of COVID-19 in our state and our nation.
State lawmakers head back to Hartford on February 9th. They will have only 6 days to pass all 11 of those executive orders into law. Well, now we head overseas, where Russia keeps sending even more troops to the Ukrainian border. Are we headed to war? President Biden says there's a distinct possibility of an invasion next month. But Russia's top diplomat insists war is not in the plans.
If it is up to the Russian Federation, there will be no war. We don't want a war, but we will not allow our interests to be trampled on.
So are we going to World War III? A lot of people are wondering. We have 2 experts here to talk about it today. Alex Plitsas is a former Pentagon analyst from Fairfield. Dr. Marco Scalzo is a political scientist with Quinnipiac University. Okay, Alex, let's start with you because you were on the ground in Ukraine a few years ago. Should we be worried?
I think in terms of the U.S. getting involved in the conflict at this point, no, I don't believe so. But in terms of worrisome actions that are coming, I think the probability at this point of a Russian invasion or incursion into Ukrainian territory is probably better than 60, 70% at this point, given what we're seeing on the ground.
So when we say invasion, what does that look like?
Well, it's an interesting question because the objectives at this point from Moscow are not 100% clear. So the last time they launched a full-scale military incursion into Ukrainian territory in 2014, when it first kicked off, they did so to annex Crimea.
So Marcus, let me get you in on this. what's the big picture here? Why is Russia doing this?
So the bigger picture of geopolitics here leads us to think about a Western hemisphere that has been sort of slowly expanding eastward, and a Russia that feels concerned about some of these expansions. And as Alex was mentioning, the Ukraine is a little bit of a red line for Putin.
Alex, we were talking about what an invasion might look like a minute ago. We might not just be talking about a physical invasion here. I mean, Russia is very good at cyber attacks and other types of unconventional warfare.
Yes, that's 100% correct. So what we saw, I think, in 2014 was the successful utilization of information operations for a strategic purpose that were conducted out of Moscow. Putin's favorite excuse for launching military action, whether it be inside of Georgia, whether it's in South Ossetia, Abkhazia, there obviously were issues in the Caucasus. Their general claim is that the Russian diaspora is under attack. In that case, it was by, anti-Russian fascists is how he was saying it, and that there were, these physical attacks taking place. None of it was true. It was all Russian propaganda. If he's able to stage a bloodless coup internally and have a pro-Russian government take over, then military action may not be necessary. He gets the same outcome he was looking for without having to send in troops. So it's still possible a military incursion may not happen.
And we do have the capability to apply very heavy sanctions in technology areas, for example, that we've used in against companies. We haven't used them against entire countries, which is very risky, but at the same time, they could really weaken and undermine key industries.
All right. The U.S. is putting troops on standby, but President Biden says we are not sending ground forces.
I made it clear to early on to President Putin that if he were to move into Ukraine, that there'd be severe consequences, including significant economic sanctions.
Alex, you got a lot of attention this summer for rescuing people out of Afghanistan when the U.S. pulled out and the Taliban took over. Those are still haunting images to look at. If we underreact to this, couldn't Ukraine become another Afghanistan?
In terms of our underreaction, right? So if the Russians were to invade, and the president, I think, has been steadfast in his commitment that we're not going to send military forces into Ukraine, I think a very similar situation. The State Department made it quite clear that there will not be a military-style evacuation operation as transpired in Afghanistan. And so folks could end up becoming trapped. And, the State Department is asking people to leave if they're there. And I would highly encourage anybody, if they're listening, to register with the U.S. State Department and to follow travel advisories. And if they're telling you to leave, I would please leave the country as soon as possible.
Russia wants a guarantee that Ukraine and any other former Soviet republic won't join NATO. The U.S. says no deal. We are back in 3 minutes. Next, you know it, computers seem to run everything these days, right? But is our state vulnerable to a massive cyber attack? I'm John Craven. This is Power in Politics. Computer hacks are getting more frequent and more sophisticated, and that could leave Connecticut's power grid, our water systems, even traffic lights at risk. This new cybersecurity report says the risk is very real, but Connecticut is fighting back. Jeffery Brown is the state's first ever Chief Information Security Officer. I asked him, how vulnerable are we?
The short answer is that everybody is vulnerable to cyber attacks. I've been in this industry over 25 years now. And the method has really gone from trying to prevent any and all attacks from happening anywhere to really being much more of an active defense. The shift now is on resiliency, being able to prevent most attacks and being able to react when there is something that does get through, and being able to react very quickly.
All right, so we just mentioned that Connecticut is out with this new cybersecurity report. Let's go over some of the highlights here. We are seeing more cyber attacks. Last year saw a significant number of network intrusions by a large variety of actors. And phishing attempts are also becoming more automated and easier to conduct. Nationally, it says energy utilities were targeted with a number of targeted attacks. What about here in Connecticut?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And phishing remains the #1 vector, and there's a reason for it. It's easy. Any attacker can just send out a lot of different emails, and hopefully it's a numbers game, right? We have 30,000 employees in the state. Any one of them clicks on something and you could have a problem. So we do our own. We actually use this to our advantage. Phishing is easy. So we do our own phishing simulations. This keeps people on their toes. It's something that the state hadn't done in the past, but now we do this on a monthly cadence to all employees, all the way up to the governors.
One area we hear a lot about is election security. Now, to be clear, the machines you vote on themselves are not connected to the internet, but all these small town registrars across the state, they are connected to the internet. They have a lot of critical voter information on their computers. How vulnerable are they?
Yeah, great question. And, election security especially is something that people don't understand very well. And there's an assumption that, you can go in and flip an election and turn a Democrat winner into a Republican winner, things like that. But really, it's highly impractical. And attackers are pretty lazy too. So, really looking at how to attack an election, they use the easy things that are effective. And unfortunately, that's actually social media.
But Jeff, is there a way that a hacker could send a phishing email or something like that and get into a local registrar's database?
We actually put together an effort with the Secretary of State and the National Guard to actually go through and physically assess the security, right? Like show us how you operate.
What's your worst case scenario? What's the thing that makes you nervous?
And so we just went through, Connecticut was one of 4 states that were selected to work with the Energy ISAC. And the National Governors Association. We did something called GridX, which is a tabletop exercise. This was the worst case scenario. This was a coordinated, and again, tabletop, right? This is all pretend. It was like, coordinated physical attacks on energy infrastructure. It was cyber attacks in conjunction with that, one thing after another. And how do we react? And that kind of practice really gives us the resiliency that we need. So when a real event happens, we're ready. We've thought through all of the different kind of responses that we can have, and that we're not just trying to figure it all out in the heat of the moment.
Lots of interesting information in this new cybersecurity report. Read it for yourself on the News 12 app. Just click on this edition of Power and Politics. And there is more P&P coming up. You can now gamble right here on your phone. You can also lose a lot of money that way. Next, is Connecticut doing enough to track problem gambling? We are back on Power and Politics. I'm John Craven. Our last word today, gambling. Your phone is now a mobile casino, but is Connecticut doing enough to stop problem gambling? News 12 Connecticut's Sean McCabe takes a look.
Starting a business is hard, and starting a highly regulated business in such a tight time frame is even harder.